Hello, everybody. So, let's get started, shall we? My name is Phil Carlisle, and I'm the Programme Leader for Games Computing at the University of Lincoln. And we're going to basically talk you through the program, but also spend some time talking about the industry and where I think some of the technology is going, because this is a key part of my job, is to understand how the industry changes. So I'm program leader for games computing, and I've been a game developer for most of my adult life, to be fair, but for at least 20 years. And in that time, I transitioned from being a programmer on a games company to being a lecturer, but I still program games. So I try and keep all of my knowledge up to date. And a lot of what I do in this job is figuring out where the program needs to go to be up to date. So to actually kind of keeping on top of the industry. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through four main things. First is to explain what games computing is, and just in case people don't know. The second one is like what are you actually going to have a look at if you study games computing. The third one is what are why would you come to Lincoln specifically? Because obviously there's lots of different places you could study. And then fourth is like, what are the prospects for getting a job at the end of it? So to start off with, we start with what is games computing. And this is a really interesting kind of question, because over the time, it's very clear that what we're dealing with really is computer science. But the idea of a computer science that's specific to what we call the creative industries. So the idea is that we're studying computer science, but we're actually taking technical challenges from the creative industries, from film and media and games, and we're trying to build the technology that supports that particular type of industry. So it is computer science, and a lot of people have this problem of, why wouldn't you just study computer science? Well, the thing is, you are studying computer science, you're just studying it with a particular emphasis, and that emphasis is on interactivity and kind of essentially sort of graphical media type outputs. So from my point of view, why am I interested in games? Well, for me, I think the reason why I got into games in the first place was that I was a very visual kind of, I was very driven by visuals. I liked the fact that I could see other worlds and imagine things and actually create them. And over the years I've been working in games, I've realized that actually that's part of it, but also part of it is the technology of creation. So that idea that we can create aesthetic things that don't exist, and we can solve problems to make them exist. So we can essentially take our technical skill and create art with them. And that's what drives me, I think. So it's solving problems that are highly technically challenging, but also very creative. And I find that really interesting, and a lot of people do. So in terms of the bigger picture, try and think of games not just as games, but as anything that's got things like interactivity. It's audio and visual in nature. And often what we find is that these kind of artifacts are very high, driven by really high quality technology. And so the program itself is intended to give people the skills to work with those technologies and to actually develop those technologies. So just to sort of give you an idea of the kind of thing we're talking about, here's a screenshot of the basically the sort of sign up page for what we call Unreal Engine, which is one of the bigger sort of game engine technology providers by a company called Epic Games. And the thing to see here is that on screen, there's the actual engine, the game engine that this page allows you access to, has lots and lots of different industries involved. And that's a thing that's relatively recent, but actually is becoming more and more um, popular over time. So the idea is that a lot of these engine providers, these game technology providers, are actually working across a whole bunch of different industries now. And I think that's a fundamental shift in the way that people think of things like real-time rendering technologies. So Unreal Engine's very, very big across a broad range of media, and that means that there's lots of opportunity, and subsequently the value of the companies has gone up very significantly. So Unreal Engine, Epic Games recently got valued at something like $17 billion. And obviously you can kind of look these figures up, they change over time. But the idea of a technology provider, right? They basically make game engine technology, and they're valued at such a high amount because fundamentally they're one of the few companies that's driving a huge swathe of like the technical media landscape. And so if we have a look at their competitor, sort of one of their bigger competitors, a company called Unity, and again, they did a thing called an IPO, which is basically sort of taking their stock to market. And their valuation's been somewhere between 13 and 17 billion as well. So what you should notice here is that essentially, again, with Unity, the technology is being used across a whole range of like creative industries. So things like architecture is relatively new. The fact that these real-time rendering technologies are becoming so good and so popular and so easy to use that companies like architects are starting to use it. So if you're trying to visualize building or, construction, a lot of these technologies are actually kind of useful. And so this is a pattern that seems to be replicated across a lot of different sort of technology vendors that would typically just have been associated with games in the past. And so let's have a look at a few other types of media industries that take this kind of technology seriously. So there's this thing called virtual production that's been around for a couple of years, but it's really starting to get very popular right now. And certainly Epic Games and Unity are pushing this a lot. So the company called Zero Density do a lot of the virtual production thing for this, in this particular instance, is live actors, live people, so in this case, broadcasters, against a green screen backdrop that's then replaced with game engine content. And so it's virtual content with live people. And Zero Density are very big in this kind of particular sector. So they're using Unreal Engine as the basis for their technology. And that idea of mixing real and virtual is probably the key to a lot of this change of adoption. So think of green screens, think of the sort of live technology, and obviously they're using really high-end hardware for doing these kind of things. So it's not a cheap proposition, and so a lot of media companies are doing this, because it's safe to do this kind of presentation, whereas like before they might have got everybody together in a physical studio. During the pandemic, it's kind of problematic to do that. So that a lot of companies are moving towards this virtual production model. And it also helps keep costs down because the sets are cheaper. So another example of virtual production, which is in the film and media space, is this idea of, and this is Disney on the set of The Mandalorian, but this is like just one example of, I've seen, thousands of these at this point. They get a big, essentially they're using a real-time render engine, in this case Unreal Engine, and they're producing, you can see the sort of backdrop here. So the actors are essentially surrounded by a large LED wall that's driven by the game engine to render the background. And the idea is that they have virtual sets, they have real actors and real props on a sort of real terrain, but ultimately most of the scene is composed of virtual backdrop. And so that saves them huge amounts in terms of sets, the cost of production and those kind of things. And this is something that the film industry is definitely getting on board with. They've been into, using real-time technologies for quite a while for things like pre-visualization. But what we can see is that move is moving towards what we call in-camera effects. So the idea is that they're using these LED walls to compose the scene like live inside the camera. So it's actually capturing the color and that kind of information. So that's another interesting feature of like where render engines are going, where technology is going. Another one is that if we take that same technology, the fact is that it's a live rendered version of things, right? So ultimately, that liveness allows you to do things with the actual imagery, and a lot of concerts use that same kind of technology. So essentially, there's a load of technology vendors that provide live backgrounds, live concert sort of imagery that plays during an event. And here's an example from Childish Gambino. But there's lots and lots of technology providers that do this kind of live event information. And so actually there's a big industry involved. Obviously, currently they can't do those kind of things. But part of the creative industries is this live event. And a lot of it's driven by essentially game engine technology still. So that's an interesting sort of aside from a lot of that technology usage, is that we're starting to mix it with real live events, real world. And obviously not to forget that, so we've been talking about game engine technologies and different uses of it, but obviously the games themselves are still being produced. And the thing to sort of point out is that the size of the industry is very large, right? So we're not talking about games that are essentially a third party kind of use for the engines. They're still a major feature in terms of media. So the bigger picture here really is that we're talking about technology, and the goal that I've got for the program is to give you the core skills so that you're not phased by new technologies. So you understand the technologies that are available in creative industries, and it doesn't matter essentially where you go and work. You still have a set of transferable skills, mainly programming skills, but you kind of use the technology that's available. So I actually found I was looking for a sort of how big is the industry in the UK, right? The sort of games industry just by itself is very large worldwide. But I wanted to know, like, how much is the sort of creative industries section of the UK economy? And luckily enough, December 10th, a report from the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport came out, and they're estimating that the value of the creative industries to the UK economy last year, so this is before pandemic kind of, was 115 billion. Now, if we combine that with the digital sector as well, which is kind of any kind of programming output, so software engineering for other industries, we essentially get 265 billion pounds. So we can see that the industries that are, the things that where you would end up working are a considerable contributor to the UK's income. And actually the creative industries definitely contributes way more than a lot of others. So it's actually a big industry and growing. So one of the big takeaways for this is that it is a big business, right? So we're not talking about, the traditional image that parents have often with a single child sat in their bedroom programming a game. All of that can happen. These days, the games industry is driven by large technology giant corporations, essentially. So it is a big business, but you can obviously still work at that really small scale as well. So next section, what do you study? So given that we've sort of identified that there's a large industry, what do you study? And obviously you can have a look at the website for all of the sort of specifics of this, but I thought I'd break it down by essentially looking at all of these in terms of the bigger picture of like what kinds of things do you study. So the first one is design, and we tend to start off with design early on so that you have design skills as you're sort of transferring things, as you're sort of learning to program and learning to create things, you need to be able to design them up front. So we have obviously a lot of design, and obviously these modules, the sort of things that we're teaching you don't just teach you one thing, right? They might teach you design and programming. So I'm just sort of highlighting where I think are sort of key fundamental aspects are taught. So design's a big thing early on in the program so that you can then use those design skills later. But the main thing for this particular program is the idea of programming. And you will do a lot of programming across a lot of different languages and different technologies. And the idea is to keep you programming all the way through. So we teach you things like Python and C# and C++. The idea is that you keep practicing programming because it is a practice-based discipline. You need to do it a lot to really, it needs to be second nature to you. So doing it by practicing it is the key feature. So there's a little bit of teamwork involved. We do specifically teach you that because obviously employers want people who can work on teams. And there's a bit of maths involved, mainly just because maths is required for things like 3D. So there is a fundamental need, and we teach you that. I teach a fair bit of maths in third year on the graphics module, for instance. Another big focus is that there's a lot of technology. So if you think of all of these modules as a way of leading you into programming technologies, and the idea of the technology is that we sort of scale up the difficulty as we're going along. So we might start off in the first year relatively simple, easy to use programming languages, relatively easy challenges. But as you go through the course, you find that the challenge increases. And at the end of the course, you should be really challenged. You should be really pushing yourself to find something that interests you and really, really dig deep into it. So another way of thinking about it is this, right? So the first year, really the goal is to get you up to speed as a programmer. So we do some design as well as that, but essentially we want you to be a reasonably good programmer at the end of the first year. So the idea is that you can, if I give you a task, you should be able to at least think of the data structures, the sort of code that you would need to make that thing work. So that's the fundamental parts of programming, and that's what you get taught in the first year. And then we move on to the second year, where it's more about learning some more technology, building up team working skills, still programming a lot, still learning some design, but ultimately transitioning towards kind of being able to function as a team and work on projects. So that's when we kind of scale up a little bit in the second year. And then in the final year, this is more about you really going deep into a set of technologies and a broad range of technologies. So you'll notice that there's options in this year. So the idea is that you're independently, figuring out what interests you. The idea is that you should have something at the end of this that you're really proud of and that you're excited about. So you need to think about what technologies you're interested in. And so a lot of these technologies, we allow you to choose the options so that you can kind of pursue the things that are interesting to you. So there is that optionality in there. And that's another key part, is that we want you to feel like you own your own learning, right? We want you to be the driver of a lot of this information. So really the big takeaway for a lot of this is about portfolio and the idea of practice. You need to practice programming so that you can create things. We can teach you the basics of programming, but ultimately you need to practice it to really embed it in your it's a bit like sort of driving a car. You couldn't drive a car if you only ever tried it once every 3 months, right? Your brain doesn't quite work that way. You need to practice often enough that it becomes second nature. All of the things that take you time become second nature if you practice it often enough. So this is a practice-based discipline. You have to spend lots of time essentially programming pretty much anything. But ideally, you program something creative so that it's a bit more, it reinforces the enjoyment of it. So the second big takeaway for this really is that the portfolios is the key thing. In the creative industries, what people want to see is what you can do. And you demonstrate that by having done it and having a thing to show it off. So portfolio is absolutely key in the creative industries. So another big question is, why would you study games computing at Lincoln, right? So there's lots of courses that do games. Why do you think Lincoln would be a good one? Well, an obvious one for me is that the staff that teach you are actually really good. So I mean, there's a thing called the Teaching Excellence Framework, right? And they had a way of measuring sort of teaching standards, and we came out as TEF Gold. But just in general, what I would say is that the teaching staff try our best to figure out better ways of presenting materials, of helping you, supporting you in learning the subject. And we're also really engaged with the subject as well, right? So we're involved, with games. We're interested in games as an artifact. We're interested in the technology of games. So there's lots of reasons why we would be good at teaching those kind of things. Another interesting part of that, and that's part of the interest of for us, is that we do a lot of research. So my particular area is about artificial intelligence and creating games content through machine learning and those kind of things. We do a lot of research in our interaction lab about things like virtual or augmented reality, game design. We work with other partners, external partners. We work with commercial organizations. Recent one was we worked with the RAF to do an augmented reality application. So the point is that the research is an active kind of aspect of our work, and we're expected to do research, but also it kind of drives a lot of our teaching. So the research informs the things that we teach, and I obviously my focus is on visuals and aesthetics and those kind of things, and that really does drive a lot of the way I teach things like graphics. But this research focus isn't just about staff doing research and students never getting involved, right? A big part of it is also that students should be involved in research. And what we want to do is we want to build a research culture that reinforces the idea that we need to know more about the craft that they're working on. So we need to know more about how games are developed, what they do to players, how they're perceived. And we want students to know more as well and to seek that knowledge. So a lot of the time, students tend to do this through their final year project, which is like a big 45 credit project that they really get involved with. But there are things like the Euros scheme where the students can work with a particular academic on a subject, a particular subject. So for instance, I put a Euros scheme out last year for working on motion capture technology with me just before the pandemic. And unfortunately, the actual motion capture technology was stuck in my office for a while. So that will be another project that goes out next year. And so those kind of things where a student's involved with a particular academic, they work together on a particular brief. It's generally a short duration sort of project, but it's a really good idea for things like your portfolio. So that kind of thing is really good to get involved in. But thinking about student projects, a lot of the time we have to show that our artifacts have some kind of impact, right? And so this idea of conducting research and experiments is a core part of that. So you often find that student projects, they test some theoretical idea. So things like aiming assist is one of my student projects, right? The idea of aim assist for people who are who don't have steady hands, essentially. And so research projects tend to be a thing that you do a lot of in third year, and you might participate in lots of other people's research projects. So it tends to be a bit of a reciprocal idea, right? So You'll be a tester for other people's projects, and they'll test yours. But the idea is that we start to gain more knowledge as a cohort, as a group, as a peer kind of mentoring thing. If we do more research and we get better at understanding what we're producing. So there's a culture of collaboration and research, but it's really hard to sort of to understand how important that is. When you're studying with us, it's not like you're studying alone, right? You're studying with staff and with other students, and we want you to feel like there's a collaborative nature to a lot of that. Now, obviously, if you're studying at Lincoln, there's the whole aspect of typical university life, right? The fact that you are at university, the fact that this is a university town, right? It's largely driven by the university. It's actually a really nice place as well, which is a big feature, I think. The campus is good. The staff are great in terms of collaboration. And the university as a whole has a very solid reputation, our research reputation internationally, and our employment sort of reputation is very good as well. So essentially, Lincoln's got a very solid reputation, but the main thing is just the way that staff and students interact, I think, is the key thing here. So there's traditional sort of social aspects of university, and most universities will have this, but I found that, so I joined Lincoln a few years ago, 2-3 years ago now, and I found that it was really interesting. Lincoln does have an awful lot of activities to get involved in, and the one that I think is probably a little bit unusual is just that there's always some seminar, there's always some talk you can go to. So there's the usual things like societies, right? So there's a game society, there's a computer science society, there's all sorts of clubs that you can get involved in, things like canoeing and those kind of things. There's live action role playing, there's lots and lots of student-led clubs, but there are also activities like, so the Computer Science Society and the Game Society put on game jams and hackathons that you can get involved with. But what I found is that the university itself puts on a lot of activities. So the university is always hosting some kind of event. And I think that that's a really interesting feature of Lincoln. So there's things like, obviously live concerts and those kind of things, but there's also, a seminar with a really a distinguished professor probably in an area that you're not used to, right? So things like psychologists and those kind of things. And they're really, really useful to go and get a picture of another area. And I find that really valuable as a researcher. So we have this idea of a student producer model. So essentially the idea is that you're producing information, you're producing knowledge, and you're sharing that with other people. So it's not like somebody's just, you're not just passively sat there waiting for somebody to deliver knowledge into your brain. You're actually, you're sharing your knowledge with your peers, you're mentoring other people, you're being mentored, you're working with staff, you're teaching staff new ideas, and you're investigating things that you're interested in. And the idea is that we support each other in that investigation. So there's a few things, concrete things that we've been doing recently. Obviously, during the pandemic, we're doing a lot of these things virtually, but the idea of this collaboration stems all the way through the program. So, for instance, we do every semester we do things called town hall meetings where you can give feedback on the program, just sort of give us general ideas of how well we're doing. So we'll do things like town hall meetings. Obviously, you have a course representation structure through the student union and through course representatives. And again, if you don't feel like you can speak to a particular module program leader or module tutor, you can speak to your course rep. If there's anything negative you have to say, obviously that kind of thing. We want to be constructive, right? We want to make things better for you. So the more you can do these kind of things, the better. So that's part of the collaboration. But also, like we tend to do some unusual things, right? So, for instance, Chris and myself, we both do live streams. So the idea here is that it's a different way of engaging with students. And obviously, a lot of students, especially game students, they do live streaming themselves as well. They enjoy the sort of live stream format. So we stream on Twitch, we stream on YouTube. And the idea here is that we're engaging with a more in a more natural way, I guess. And we have fun playing games on stream. Chris has a thing for Sea of Thieves, and we have a good sort of relationship with Microsoft. So it's good to sort of play those kind of games. And so that kind of thing is what we try and do more of that, really. The games program especially is about these kind of fun activities. So there's loads of in terms of that collaboration stuff, there's loads of help when you're a programmer, when you're first learning. It's really difficult, right? It does take a lot of effort and a lot of frustration and getting through that frustration. So there's lots of other help that we can provide. So things like personal tutorships, helping with peer mentoring. So you can get somebody who's maybe been in the program the year before you to talk through some of the module specifics. We have demonstrators. So these are generally postgraduate students that are paid to help with student problems. That we have staff, and we have staff contact hours. So the point is that there's lots of help for you if you're struggling with a particular problem. But the idea is that, as you're going through a program, especially something that's, technology focused, you will have frustration, you will have problems. And it's about building resiliency and building that sort of work ethic so that you get to the point where you can tackle any kind of technical problem. So my main sort of takeaway for this part is that university is about taking part, right? It's being active and collaborating on things and pushing yourself forward, talking to staff, talking to other students, and really figuring out what excites you about sort of the area, the subject that you're studying with. So the final part of this is about sort of where the industry is heading, what kind of things are happening, how do we support you in job hunting and those kind of things. So I guess the main thing to sort of mention here is that often students ask about this idea of placements, and we do encourage and support placements. We have a guy called Sam who really helps out with a lot of this. We tend to try and get a lot of employers in so that we can kind of we can foster that relationship. But the reality is that placements are very rare in the games industry. So a lot of the time, it is hard. It might be that there's more opportunity for placements in technology providers. And actually, I think placements are probably, obviously, virtually kind of difficult. But placement opportunities, as the sort of games technology is enabled in lots of other media industries, I think the placements will come from a lot of those as well. So it's not just about games, it's about finding yourself some interesting place to work, and we'll support you and help you in doing that. So you can essentially take a year's placement and go and work in the industry before you finish off your degree. So I mentioned this before, but the creative industries is one of the most sort of growing aspects of the UK economy, and it grew 4 times more than other sectors last year, according to this report that came out on the 10th of December. And I would say that that's very much true going forward, right? So it will be true that the creative industries is probably going to be relatively unscathed apart from the live aspects of it. So if we think about the industries that are doing relatively well, obviously retail, if you're a sort of grocery vendor, they're doing pretty well right now. But actually the creative industries sector is doing relatively well apart from the live aspect. So anybody who's doing live concerts and stuff, they're not doing so well, live events and those kind of things. But the games industry itself, the sort of, the online gaming and those kind of things, they're doing well because people have more time for media, essentially, right? They're at home, they're online more, So it actually ends up being a bit of a sort of double-edged sword here for the creative industries. But I will say that last year, before the pandemic hit, the creative industries grew 4 times the national average. So basically, it was growing much faster than lots of other sectors. And so one thing that's part of my job is to figure out what's happening with new technologies and things that are going to come along in the next few years. And it just so happens that sort of next year, I'm seeing a lot of really new technologies come on stream. So the next generation of games consoles just released, and a lot of the technologies that are enabling these things are going to be more mainstream from sort of the middle of next year. And so what I'm seeing is a lot of industries are going to be impacted by that. And so they're going to need to staff up. And I think that the creative industries will come out of this current pandemic situation really strongly. And so there's actually a lot of prospects here in terms of being positive about the future of the creative industries in general. Another aspect of that, which is, it's a bit sort of macabre to think about, but ultimately you can think that a lot of companies have been forced to do things online before they would have. I think that this was pretty much inevitable, but certainly a lot of the companies I've spoken to have said they were already thinking about moving a lot of their platforms and content and technologies online, and now they're really on board with doing that. So there's lots and lots of things like IT infrastructure planning and lots of creative industries have started moving towards these online platforms. And that means that there's lots of opportunity for just general sort of technology development stuff. And that's really what the key to this program is, right? It's understanding creative technologies. And so we're actually in a really good situation where there's a lot of need for it. A lot of companies have been forced into looking into it. And so there's probably a lot more interest there. Maybe this will sort of pan out over the longer term as well. I think that a lot of this change will be relatively permanent. So speaking to employers, traditionally, the thing that they really like about Lincoln graduates is that they're not scared of new technologies. They're not scared of essentially getting involved and diving into new areas of technology. So there's a company that I was speaking to in London where they work with web-based technologies, and they said that they really like the graduates, and they actually took a couple more on. They really like the graduates from Lincoln because they hadn't used the technology that this company was using before, but they just got on with it. And that's what employers really want, right? They want people who can be productive as soon as they start. So not being scared of adopting to new technologies is a really fundamental aspect of being a good programmer in general. So I would consider that anybody who considers himself a professional programmer wouldn't be bothered by changing technologies. And it is a common thing in the games industry. We often have new platforms to deliver on. So that's a key core skill that I think is useful. So in terms of graduates, I actually asked the university to give me some figures for a lot of, so to figure out where the graduates end up. And I don't want to sort of single out a particular company, but the university does surveys of our graduates. And the last one that we've got data for, it gave a high value of 94.4%. I think the overall for like our department was 95%, but 94.4% in what we call highly skilled jobs. Now, I've no idea how they categorize jobs, but there are highly skilled and skilled apparently. And so 94.4% of our students ended up in highly skilled jobs. So things like programming jobs are considered highly skilled. So that's what I would expect you to do. So the takeaway for this part is essentially that I think now is actually a really good time to study games and the technologies involved. I think that obviously there's a challenge in the pandemic, but ultimately it's a really positive outlook. because our industry is probably going to do well out of coming out of this. People will still want a lot of the positive experience of creativity. So it's probably not a bad time to start, because by the time you finish, we'll have been out of all of these lockdowns, and we'll probably have a pandemic under control, and we'll actually have an industry that's really, really firing on multiple cylinders, new technologies, new features, new industries interested in using our technology. So it's actually a really good time to get into it now. So just to recap, what we've kind of talked about is that games computing is a part of a bigger creative industry sector, and it is a big business. It's not, obviously, parents have a difficult time accepting that you might want to study things like games computing, but actually the games industry is massive. Like it's very hard for people to understand how big a scale it is, because it is a media industry. And so I think all of the media companies are interested in games as a set of content, but also, it's just a big industry in and of itself. The second one is that portfolio is the prime thing that gets you a job. So creating a portfolio of really high quality technical content is the key for at least getting a programming job. And obviously design, you need to be able to show that you can do the job. So the idea is that we're aiming to create a program that allows you to demonstrate your ability through portfolio, and portfolio building is a key part of that. The third part is that the idea of university isn't about being taught something so much as investigating it for yourself. So taking part and being part of your own learning, being active and involved in things like, being in the game development scene is a good thing. So actually being actively involved and practicing a lot is a really big part. And also being collaborative, right? Working with staff and other students, working on new projects, being involved in the community and those kind of things. And then the fourth one is that the actual sector itself, even though the live part's currently curtailed, is actually going to be really, it's going to be really big for the UK economy going forward, and we're obviously going to need it. So we're in a relatively strong position. I think once we've passed most of the pandemic, I think the creative industries is going to be a very strong industry to be in. So it's a very good time to start studying, because by the time you come out, we'll have a very strong, and obviously the UK economy will need this. So we'll see a lot of sector support, I think, from the UK government to try and push the creative industries, because it is one of the areas that is growing a lot faster than the others. So we're going to see a lot of sector support, and I'm starting to see that already with the companies and the Creative England sort of people that I work with. So that's really it. I just want to sort of make sure that you have my email so that you can ask me any questions anytime you like. Obviously, I'm available. We're doing a virtual open day on Wednesday afternoon, 6 o'clock. So I guess it's not afternoon. So if you've got any questions, obviously you can post them in the chat, but also you can come along to that virtual open day or send me an email. You can see my email address on the screen there. So if we've got any questions, now would be a good time. Just post them in the chat. Otherwise, thank you. Okay, it looks like we've not got any particular comments. So if you want to just send me an email anytime, that's fine. And I'll thank you again and say goodbye.